croissant and some coffee. We've got people online as well, so I'll just say good morning. I hope you're having breakfast as you're watching this. We're very pleased today to have Dr. Peter Balan in the speaker's role, and I'll read off a few things, but first of all I wanted to just acknowledge the country. I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. And I'll read out Peter's intro because he's done so many things, I'd forget something. So Peter is a senior lecturer and researcher in entrepreneurship in the School of Management. He has filled a number of roles at UniSA, including Foundation Head of the School of Marketing, the Foundation Director of the Centre for Development for Entrepreneurs. He's very much industry oriented and has been recognised with UniSA awards for community engagement. He's also been recognised with the Order of Australia Medal for services to tertiary education and the community of South Australia. Peter has for many years been searching for ways to engage students in their learning, and that is the main reason why he adopted team-based learning in 2010. He's an elected member of the board of Team-Based Learning Collaborative and has completed the 2-year process to become an accredited trainer in team-based learning. Peter has systematically innovated in his teaching with the aim of enhancing student engagement, and this has led to him gaining 2 UniSA awards for teaching excellence and a National Award for Teaching Excellence in 2016. He has developed kits for several of his teaching innovations, and they are used by educators around the world in disciplines besides entrepreneurship. One of his major achievements over the last 6 years has been to develop a continuous innovation and evaluation process that has allowed him to build a pipeline of research papers based on his teaching innovations and to develop an international network of collaborators in research into education. Peter will describe this continuous innovation process leading to research output using a recent paper as an example. So that's the red bit. The non-red bit is I've known Peter since I started at UniSA 11 years ago. My colleague Peter Hill, who used to manage grants and awards, said, "There's this guy, the light has been switched on and he is so passionate about teaching and learning." And that's Peter, and that's how I know him. He's an advocate, he's tireless, he's enthusiastic, he's infectious in the best possible way. And the Australian University Teaching Awards, I mean, they give out about 16 a year around the nation. And so to receive an award for teaching excellence nationally says something. It's really quite an honour, and Peter is really deserving of that award. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Peter. We'll run this until about 1:45 or 10:02, and then we'll take some questions. So do think of some questions, and the folks at home or wherever you are today, please also, if you have questions, we'll respond to you as well. Over to you.
Well, thanks for your very generous introduction, and thank you all for coming along at this hour of the day. But this is an area, as Gavin said, that I'm really passionate about, and the starting point for this session is to pose the rhetorical question, why would we want to generate research output? Because those of you who attended the Vice-Chancellor's recent town hall meetings heard him say that teaching is 85% of the university, and that's where most of the revenue comes from. It's the most visible part of the university. It's the one that the public sees. But thanks to the ERA, we are judged by research output. And you're no doubt familiar with the attention that research output has got in the media only in the last few weeks. That's the reality. So we are measured in that way. It's quantified. So as individuals, we are measured by research output, and our schools are measured by research output. So that they, in fact, are the performance measures. So if we can find a way to generate research output from the most visible activity in the university, from the stuff that we do, then that sounds like a pretty good idea. And it brings a lot of benefits, of course, besides being measurable output. It helps us to understand what we're doing and how to do it better. So what are different ways of getting research output? There are reflections papers, but you know that's pretty tricky. It's sort of almost anthropological type of research. Not too much scope there. There's scholarship of teaching and learning, and although I accept that there are definitions of SOTL that encompass traditional research, I split out research in the conventional sense as a separate category because that's the language that most of the university understands. And so I'm going to address the third way of doing research. So this is a case study, and it's a case study which in effect steps through a paper which has only in the last 2 weeks been accepted in its final form for publication. And what is very agreeable for me is that it's accepted into an ERA A-star journal, and it's in effect based on my application for a National Teaching Award. So I'm very pleased with that because there's a lot of work that goes into applying for one of these awards. It's really a big effort over years, and it's the same as writing a really good journal paper. So I'd done all the work. I was very happy to receive the award, but even at that time I was thinking, how can I turn this into a paper? And finally it dawned on me the way that I could do this. So you've got access to this paper, by the way. I've had an email sent around with a link to a website from which you can download this. And you can refer to that as we go. I'll read through it afterwards. So this paper had a specific strategy behind it, and that was that I wrote it as a platform paper because it lays the groundwork for a whole stream of other papers which are already, some which are already in progress. And the important thing for me is that it's positioned in a context where we face real challenges because we've got a changing environment, and what I've done is to look at the interests of three stakeholders. There's the community, and the community expects things of us as educators, of the magical way in which we transform our students coming in to wonderfully accomplished adults on the way out. I've had email debates with industry leaders who've said this is what we expect a typical university graduate to have, and the only thing that was missing was the ability to walk on water. It was really so completely unrealistic that I just had to have a go at them, and yeah, they didn't really know quite how to respond because these people, to be blunt, are out of touch with our situation, with our conditions. So the community expects employability and a whole range of other things. The university expects efficiency, it expects us to teach at low cost, and also the university wants good student retention, because all of these are things that have important financial implications. Now, the students are engaged, as we know, with their smartphones, with their part-time work, at least that's the environment that I'm used to, and my view is that their perception of life and the university is characterized or captured by three words: easy, fast, and free. Things should be easy, like putting a search term into a search engine. The results should be as fast, and it should be at no personal or financial cost. And that's the situation as I see it. So, how do we engage students in learning in this very complex environment and meet these requirements of our stakeholders, not to mention our graduate qualities which we want to achieve? So what I'm doing is outlining a process to allow us to do that, which allows me to do this, and it's all about continuous innovation, and that's the process that I'll describe here. So the structure of the paper is the exploration of student perceptions of engagement with a particular teaching method or pedagogy. I use that as an example, and you can see how I'll apply that to a whole range of other teaching innovations. So what I've included in the paper is a description of how this process is applied to one pedagogy as an example, but then there's an appendix that includes a whole range of other innovations which is not everything I do, but it's the ones that I think are the most interesting. So these are the pedagogies that I've described in the appendix, and you can see there's quite a range of them, and it's possible to explore all of these and generate research output in relation to each one of these. So my research strategy is through this paper to lay the groundwork for exploring these things and others, and if you're interested in being involved, I'm more than happy to talk, and we'll address that later on in the session. So let's get back to the motivation for doing all this. Why look at student engagement? Well, there's been a lot of research that shows that engagement is really important for achieving improved learning outcomes and self-efficacy. And those are the things that really we aim to develop in our students. And these things, engagement is particularly important in entrepreneurship education. At least that's the argument, simply because entrepreneurship deals with incredible complexity. It deals with what's happening inside the business, outside the business. Students have to take account of pretty well everything that they can imagine in relation to creating a business. And so the entrepreneurship literature argues that engagement is absolutely central. It's a real requirement. But, of course, this applies to any field of study. So, here was my motivation for the research. How can we build engagement? And that's why, as in my introduction, you heard that I adopted a particular teaching method, team-based learning, because it was asserted that this increases student engagement. And when I saw a test, I thought, yes, this looks as though it does do that, but does it really? And that was the research idea that started my whole thinking about applying research methods to education back in 2010. So just a few words about team-based learning. It's been around since the late 70s, when Professor Larry Michelson faced the challenge of teaching many more students than he was used to. So he put them into teams, but he developed a structured approach which is outlined in this slide, which requires students to pre-learn. So that idea has been around for actually a very long time. But the key tricks are, firstly, they are tested on the stuff they've pre-learned, and that means they have to come to class, and that's magic. In class, students work on exercises that elaborate on and build on the knowledge that they have learned. They carry out team contribution evaluation exercises. I use Spark Plus software, as do a number of people around this university, and they complete a major team project. So, in effect, it really is the precursor to the flipped classroom, as you can see from the key steps that team-based learning involves. So, that's the pedagogy that we're looking at. So, we want to explore engagement. Now, how do we do this? How do we measure engagement? There are quantitative instruments. There's the NSSC in America. We used to have the OSCE in previous years, but it's very hard to try to use those results at the classroom level. I tried in one of my early papers, but that really it's not terribly successful. There are class level instruments that you can use, which have been adapted from the institution level instruments, but hey, unless you're running a class of 400 students, your results are really not going to be all that credible. And secondly, these are only at the classroom course level instruments. They don't look at particular pedagogies. So that's the gap. These are high-level instruments. They don't allow you to explore a particular teaching method. So that means that we need to do exploratory research. And these are the three research questions that I look at for each of the pedagogies that I've mentioned in this paper. And the research method that's used is grounded abductive approach. So it's qualitative research, and let's see how it works. There's one really great thing about UniSA, and that is that there's UniSA policy A34.1, which allows us to use evaluation data for publication as long as there are appropriate statements on the slide or material collecting the data, and as long as it's voluntary, anonymous, and in writing. And I tell you what, that's where we are leading the world, which is really great. So you're very lucky to belong here. So let's look at our case example. We're looking at one class. It was a modest number of students and quite a significant proportion of international students, but very typical of the classes I teach. They range from 30 to 100. I've got a class of 130 at the moment. So data was collected using a very simple, quick approach. So the reason I'm stepping you through this is to show you how simple and straightforward it all is. And these are the slides that I used. I gave every student a blank sheet of paper and then presented this slide saying, I'd like your opinion on this particular teaching method. And this was after I'd run, say, 2/3 of the course. And then this is the data collection slide. And you can see it's very simple, very straightforward. The students get the idea very quickly. And there are reasons which I can go into if anyone's interested in using a number. But the key thing is 2 reasons for the comments, for the score expressed in terms of how they see engagement in this course, and of course 2 improvements, because I'm into continuous improvement and I've got so much wonderful value out of doing this sort of exercise. So the data is collected. This is a form of minute evaluation, by the way, on sheets of paper. The data on these pieces of paper is transcribed, and I apply a method of analysis called concept mapping. I've published a book chapter on this method. If you're interested, I can send you a copy, or you can access a copy. But it explains how this method works, and in particular how it compares with the method that most of us are familiar with which is in vivo. But the important thing about this particular method is that it's quick. It's very straightforward. It provides an audit trail so that I go from the output right back to the input data without any ambiguity, and it provides a graphical output, as I'll demonstrate. So it's very powerful. It's so much faster than in vivo, you wouldn't believe it. I've used both. I've done a lot of work with in vivo, and this certainly is far more effective and time-saving. So here's how it works in practice. For this particular class, the data was entered into a spreadsheet. I use DragonSpeak, makes this very, very fast and accurate. And the trick then is that the researcher, I code these items for their similarities as a one-way process. In other words, working down the list of comments, I start with comment 1 and I identify every comment below that which is similar. So the important thing is that here I'm not doing any interpretation except for similarities. Does this statement say the same as that one? And so the numbers that are written there are the similar statements further down the line in this data set. I then prepare a similarities table, which is very simply a record of the intersection of each of the comments. And I do that using Excel and then load it into UCI Net 6 software. You can use it free for 30 days, but even if you pay for it, I think it's only $70, and it's definitely worth it. The UCI Net 6 software processes the data, which is then turned into a graphical form using the NetDraw package, which is bundled in with UCI Net. And what is important about this is that, in effect, it's the equivalent of factor analysis, but with graphical data. So what it does is it looks at all the similarities and clusters the comments according to their similarities. So you have groups of comments which are linked to each other by the software. Now, the great thing is, from a researcher point of view, is that I can adjust the number of clusters. It's a little bit like confirmatory factor analysis, where you can choose the number of clusters. And I can see whether additional clusters adds to the findings. So in this case, I went through the process of analysing the data and identified that this number of clusters was optimal. And there are ways of doing that. If it's the equivalent to saturation in qualitative research. So of course, I put in the circles and the numbers. So what actually came out of it was that then I go from the graphical output back to the Excel spreadsheet, and I sort the statements according to the clusters in which they're located. And that groups all the comments, and here's the test of validity. It's so simple. I check that each of the comments within a group says by and large the same thing. If I'm happy that it says the same thing, then that's fine. If there's a statement that looks out of place, I can check the coding, make a change, rerun the mapping, and the final outcome is I end up with an analysis which is based on similarities where each group is pretty homogeneous. Now, the real power of that is I've done large exercise where I collaborate with another researcher. You can actually collaborate in doing qualitative research. So, the outcome is this. I've identified, in this case, 10 clusters, and these are the themes of engagement that have emerged from this exercise. And you can see the major, and these are in decreasing order of mention, which is an indication of importance. So getting back to the paper, what we're saying is that the students perceive this particular pedagogy as primarily supporting encouraging learning. It encourages discussion, supports working together, improves results in tests, and so on. So that helps me to understand the value that they are getting from all of this. All of these tables, by the way, are in the paper. And the great thing is, from a research and publication point of view, these results can be mapped to the literature. And I've done this in another paper. And the great thing is that the dimensions that I identified, and I've done meta-analyses over several class deliveries in the same course, and they map quite well, but there are additional dimensions which emerge from my analysis, and so that's a contribution to the literature. I applied exactly the same process to improvements. You remember I asked students, what improvements might you suggest? And you know, that is a really valuable thing to do, because there you identify students' concerns. And what I identified there was that these were the major themes in order of mention. Very happy with things as they are, but then other detailed aspects that really help me as the educator to reflect on the particular pedagogy and say, how can I fine-tune or change things so that this works even better with my particular class of students in this particular course? So we arrive at the contributions. The contributions to the literature are that, as I said earlier, the themes map well onto the existing literature. And that's very important from a publication point of view, because I'm supporting the literature, but I'm adding to it. And that means that editors are happy with this, reviewers are happy with this, and the findings are anchored again in the literature. But the major addition that I'm bringing to the literature, and this is actually a very significant one, is the significant differences in response between student groups. Now that's important. Why? Because engagement up till now has been seen as a construct that applies holus bolus to all students, all across a whole university. Whereas my research is showing very clearly that there are differences from one class to the other, one delivery of a course to the other, and within a class. And this method of analysis allows me to break out the results by student group. You remember I collect data on gender and local versus international. So I can break out the results, the final results, according to those groups. And this is where I'm able to really get to understand what engagement means for this particular group of people and groups within the class, and it allows me to fine-tune things so that I can either reinforce aspects that will help to further build engagement, or I can work out what's not working as well as it could and bring in improvements. And that really is the real value of this paper, that we've looked at a particular example, and as I said, I've done a lot more work on engagement with this particular teaching method, but there are these significant contributions at the literature level and at the practical level for the educator, and that's what I do. I do use this approach with pretty well everything that I do in the classroom. So, where does this lead to from a research point of view? I'm using what's happening in the classroom, and this is just part of my normal teaching. But you can see that here there's a rich trove of research that's been opened up, because just taking this one pedagogy that I've used as the example, I've already done meta-analyses. That's been developed as a refereed conference paper, but now that's being extended and turned into a journal paper. And I'm going to be able to explore in more detail, because of using a meta-analytical approach, the influences of gender, type of student, etc., and identify what appeals to them and what is effective for them in terms of building engagement. So that's just in my own field of study, but there are plenty of other fields of study. I'm doing this in entrepreneurship education. I'm working with educators in other disciplines to apply the same sort of approach. And of course, that opens up avenues for publication in specialist journals, like in marketing education, information systems education, etc., etc., etc. So this, just taking the one pedagogy, this approach has opened up a whole field of research and a range of possible research outcomes. Now, back to the list of other pedagogies that I include in this particular paper, and there are short descriptions of each in the paper. The green one, that's been published already. That's a buy-in session. I've run sessions in UniSA on that. I've turned that into a kit. It's being used by, I think, more than 250 educators around the world. The paper was downloaded about 2,000 times in 2 years. That's from the publisher. And yeah, that's having quite an impact. The ones in yellow are currently in draft. I have collaborators who are helping me with areas of knowledge that I don't have, like pedagogy, for example. And the others, I have data on all of those. I've done some literature work on all of those, and I'm talking to people, as I said, around the world in terms of having them apply the methods or the innovations in their particular teaching, and we're looking at the possibility of comparative analyses and cross-cultural and so on. And there are other things that I'm working on, but you know, that would take a little more time to review. So, if you're interested, there are things that can be done, and the sort of help that I can propose is to have a look at what might interest you in your school, in your team. I've run workshops on these various innovations at international conferences. I've done more than 40 presentations of this type in universities around the world. And I'm working with people on data collection, and I can provide advice on data analysis as well as training. So, you know, and I'm producing kits that will do these things. And the objective is very simple: joint papers, research output, you know, and these outputs make a difference. So, you know, for example, I have a very good collaborator in our UniSA School of Education. And, you know, that person has been involved in producing one A-star paper that fits in their particular discipline. So they're pretty happy with that. So here's an example of something that's happening at the moment. And this demonstrates the ease with which this whole approach can be applied. I had an idea of trying out in different disciplines an approach that I use in my classes. It's the area is the learning contract or learning agreement. And we did this with teaching academics in 3 different schools. And I'll just use this example that already, this was done in 2016. We had a conference presentation, a conference poster, and I'm working on the paper at the moment. And the findings have turned out to be so rich that it's really going to fit well into the top journal in education, which is the Academy of Management Learning and Education, because the research method applied to this situation allows the development of insights which just haven't been possible in the past. And so the paper is providing a new perspective on the learning contract, and really this is breakthrough research, and that's going to be pretty good. So that's getting close to being finished. So here's some suggested next steps. I've asked for an email to be sent to everyone, which includes a link to a survey which gives you the possibility of expressing an opinion on each of the things that I've talked about this morning. And if you complete that, let me know. I can get in touch with you and we can work out how to explore possibilities. Because each school is different, each team is different, you're in a different teaching situation. But what I suggest is that the methods and approaches that I've expounded in this particular paper are pretty universal. And that's why it's a platform paper. So please let me know, and I'd be happy to follow up with you. There are a lot of references that relate to this particular presentation. They're all in the paper, and what we'll do is we'll make available a recording of the session. That will come later, and I already have had sent to you the links to the paper and also to the online questionnaire, and I would like you to do an evaluation which for online people, which comes later. But firstly, I'm happy to take questions, comments, suggestions.
Thanks, Peter. Succinct, informative, and with enthusiasm, as I'd expect. Are there any questions from the floor? And we'll keep an eye on folks down on the line as well. I'll just run down the back. If you can just introduce yourself and ask your question, that'd be great. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Heather Anderson from the New School of Creative Industries. I think I can say that now. It's the SIL. I'm really interested in team-based learning approaches, and we use that in an online environment last semester doing the grad dip in online teaching. So I'm really interested, well, one, to look at maybe pursuing that further, because student engagement has been a big problem with our school in terms of turning up to class. But also, just in my external class of 55 students, 9 of them listened to any of the online lectures. So I need to do something. Yeah. So I'm really interested in exploring team-based learning, but I'd like to know how that sits in a pure online environment.
Yep. Look, great question. I'm, as in the introduction, Gavin mentioned that I'm a member of the Team-Based Learning Collaborative. I joined up fairly early in the piece, and I thought that I was impressed by the people who are involved in that, really impressed by them. There's a really lovely sharing quality to these folks. So I've been, I'm the only non-US person on their board. So I'm the foreigner, so I have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning for online meetings. We've, at the annual conference last year, we formed a community of practice in online delivery. And there are people who are doing some really, really cool things online. And some of them have become my friends. The arrangement is very simple. I specialize in face-to-face. That's really my strength. And I recognize that online is a very special area of application, and there are people who are very enthusiastic. Now, what they are doing is they're taking the stuff that I'm doing and experimenting with translating that online. And so the best thing is we'll have a chat later and I'll put you in touch with the key people in that community. And what I'd suggest is that if people are interested in this, there's a annual conference in March next year, and that's a get-together of the most enthusiastic educators that I've seen for a long time. And there's a group that's focusing specifically on online. So there is plenty of help and support, and there's very clever software that's been developed to support that activity.
Thanks, Peter. There was another question in the house here. Chad? Just wait a second.
Thanks, Gavin. Hi, Peter. Chad Hable from the TIU. Great presentation. Thank you very much. I've got a question in two parts, perhaps. One of your suggestions for improvement from students down there, point 6, I think. One of them was just stick with lectures and tutorials, please. Can you comment on that a little bit and some of the pushback you might get from students against these innovations? And does that align with things like gender, international status, and maybe achievement? And so that's the second part of the question. Have you looked at achievement in terms of engagement and TBL?
Okay,
stuff?
I'll answer the first part. In that particular class, that was 2 students, right? Yes. Out of roughly 47. There will always be people who will prefer this approach. To give you a very quick example, twice a year I run a session for final year pharmacy students, and I love doing it. They're such lively, articulate people. I use this approach, and they respond in the most amazing way, but there are always a couple of students who sit there and grumble to me, because I evaluate that, and they say, yeah, they would have preferred to have a lecture where they can come along, park their brains, and let me fill their heads. Yeah, that's life. But what I do to try to minimise that is I run an orientation session, and that's the subject of a paper that's again in an A-star journal, and that's a paper that's been disseminated very widely, and where I have an implementation kit. So I've worked out an approach which really is very effective at bringing students on board, but there will always be a couple who don't like it. But you know, I regard that as inevitable. You know, students vary. All I can do is be very upfront with the students at the start, and I say very clearly, this is not an I talk, you listen type of course delivery. They do most of the talking. I'm a facilitator, and yes, there are students who find that it's you know, they have reservations, they feel nervous, unsure about contributing even in a team, let alone in a class. But I prepare students as well as I can, and that's as much as I think I can do. Now the other one. For most of my work, I gather anonymous, voluntary, and in-writing results. The exercise I did on the learning contract, I got ethics approval for that. It's identified data, and I have their marks. And part of the analysis is to look at everything, where they come from, how old they are, the mark categories, besides gender and international and so on. So I can do a lot of exploratory research, which is fantastic when using qualitative data, because it's exactly the same in effect as doing data mining when you have a quantitative data set. But you can do the same thing using this method. But yes, so I've done a couple of exercises where I've had UniSA ethics approval. And yeah, they're working quite well.
Any other questions from the floor here? Because we do have one from our online participant. Well, think about that. I'm sure you'll come up with something Hello, Deb. I don't know if you're at McGill or somewhere else, but nice to have you here today. Deb Moulton from out at McGill says she's not surprised to read the difference between local and international students, coming possibly from different pedagogical backgrounds. The international students are here to study and gain a degree in Australia, which seems to be valued, hence they are here. So should we change our practice to engage them in the ways they have been engaged traditionally, or do we help them see how this form of learning is different from a didactic approach and why?
My approach is to say that these, people who come here want a UniSA degree. And so they need to experience the same teaching approach that we use in UniSA. And by the way, I'm course coordinator for courses that are delivered in Hong Kong. And I go up there to start off the course delivery. And I use exactly the same methods, and I've trained the people to use the same method because they're getting a UniSA degree. And what I find is that when I look at the detailed feedback, the international students really like this approach. Just to use one comment that I think captures the essence of their response, an international student said, "I like this method because it forces other students to talk to me." And that has come up several times in many different ways. And it's very sad that I have comments from international students who will say that they're allocated to work in teams with local students. They never talk to each other. But this approach forces them to talk because they learn that one of the very fundamental lessons in team-based learning, this is the reason why I really like it. The students learn very, very quickly with the first classroom exercise, the team always does better than the best individual. So, in other words, the students who think they're good get really put in their box because they see every week when the class tests are run that their team does better than they did. And that really is a great sort of reality check. And they learn that some of the international students are real swats and they know their stuff. So they then say, "Hey, wait a minute, Johnny, what do you think about this question?" Because they then realise that other students know things that they don't. So and what also works, and this is what I found, is that the students who are not the high performers, they realise that, hey, they can prepare and do better, but also they can learn from others. And so it really opens their eyes to an approach to learning. Well, that's collaborative learning. And for many of them, that's the first time they've experienced it in their lives, and they see the power of it immediately, firsthand. They experience it, and that helps in the classroom. There are a lot of tricks also that I use to engage every student at the whole classroom level, but that's another conversation.
One thing I noticed, and I saw someone commented online as well, when you put up the sort of 10 most valued thing for students, feedback was the very bottom one. So can you just give your sense of what that's all about?
Yes, feedback is so built in to that teaching method that it's not something that they really have to think about. It just happens all the time. So that's actually not a surprising outcome that feedback comes right at the end because, it's built in.
They probably don't even recognise it's happening.
They don't recognise it's happening, but it's all based on feedback. They get feedback all the time. And again, I have devices for structuring feedback at the team and the classroom level. That's another one of the innovations that I'm writing up at the moment. Yep. That's the answer.
Yep. Also, they may not see it as feedback because it's not attached to assessment. So they may think feedback is when you get comments on your assignments.
Yep.
So, yeah.
That's a good observation. And what I go to a lot of effort to get them to realise that they gain by working with other people and by collaborating with other people, by conversation. I'm a believer in education being a social experience. That's my view, and I work that into my classes, and students respond, I think, in a very positive and productive manner.
Any questions? Yes, one second. Claire?
Thanks, Claire Aitchison from TIU. Very interesting. Thank you very much. There's so much useful for us there about doing research and a slightly different approach to the research than perhaps the traditional SOTL approach. One of the thoughts that I had when you put up the findings, the series from 1 to whatever it was, 10, was that there wasn't a score there, so we didn't know if it was only one person who said something, and the biggest group was comparatively 101, which you might wish to speak to. But the other thing that really piqued my interest is that notion of you get from research in response to the questions you ask. So right from the outset, gender was one of the things you were seeking to understand because you tracked that. Is there anything that's come up that differentiates the women from the men in your student group?
The answer, okay, really great question. The answer is that it takes time and effort to go into the data. And to be honest, I've focused very much on trying to sort out my ideas about how this research could be done, and just collected the data. And now I have boxes full of data, or actually folders full of data, and I'm now analysing these thoroughly. But you can really go into this. Okay, getting back to the frequency question. This is qualitative research. All I can say is that certain themes, which are my interpretation, by the way. The really important thing for me is my interpretation only occurs at the end. I don't start off with any preconceived notions of what the categories or nodes should look like. That comes out at the end. The number of comments in each one I regard simply as an indication of their importance. Certainly there's one paper that I've done where I did put in the number of comments simply because it was a larger data set, and quantitative people like to see the numbers. But yeah, it really just is an indicator. It is qualitative after all, and I can't pretend it does everything that quantitative research does. But in the exercise that I'm doing on the learning contract, where I have ethics approval to have identified data, that's why I realised that it was not a paper for the Journal of Marketing Education, which is a B journal. This was just so rich because I could burrow into the different categories and identify significant differences between groups, between mark groups and so on. And so that's why it's turning into a much richer paper. So it comes back directly to the question you face with any research. You have to put a lot of work into it and a lot of time. And that's why I'm interested in having collaborators.
Any more questions? Yes.
Oh, hi. Alicia Mitten from Flinders Uni. You've stuck in the back door. Just going back to the teams-based learning that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's been really interesting and some really valuable information there. Excuse me. With the teams-based learning, I noticed that the teams, it seemed implied that they were the same teams all the way through.
Yes.
I assume perhaps because of the marking ability to make it more seamless to be able to do that, possibly. But I'm just wondering whether or not you feel any value with mixing the teams up throughout the process.
That's again a very good question about team-based learning. One of the principles is that the teams are fixed. I use a random allocation process, which is a lot of fun for the students, but you can allocate in any way you like. But they're fixed, and one of the main reasons is that there's a lot of research that's been done into team cohesiveness, team performance, and all the rest. And what they found in a business environment is a team takes about 35 hours to reach good performance levels. Well, if we've got 10 or 13 weeks, we're starting to get to that level. And although students do ask about swapping teams, and I do organise exercise in the class where they work across teams, the focus is still very much on the team members getting to know each other. They need to eyeball each other, they need to spend time with each other, they need to communicate. Learning is a social experience. Collaborative work requires working with others. I mean, sure, you can work online, but it works better when you've met face-to-face and spent some time socialising, and that's exactly the principle that I use. So team-based learning is based on fixed teams, and I find that works very effectively, and it works right through the whole course.
Oh, great, thank you.
Question from me, Peter. Students don't come to university for many different reasons, and many of those reasons are very legitimate reasons. How do you manage this face-to-face focus when you have absenteeism for possibly really legitimate reasons? How do people fit in this teaching approach?
Well, firstly, the whole approach is self-correcting in the sense that there is a class test that starts every classroom session, and they have to be there. And they can't do it otherwise, because there are two stages to it. One is an individual test and the other is a team test. And you can't separate the two. So what I make absolutely clear right at the very start of the delivery is that if they have to miss a test, they lose marks for that test. And the net result is I get about 95%. Sure, there are students who sometimes don't turn up. There are students who, arrive with a certificate. And of course, I take that into account. But by and large, I lay out the deal right from the very start. And also, this is why I run my orientation session in the first class. It's a time investment in building a positive learning culture, and it works. And so the students realise that this is what they're getting into. And they say, that, well, that's the deal. And in fact, in that first session, I established the learning agreement or the learning contract, and that's the subject of another paper.
Sure. If there are no more questions, we'll draw this to a close. Peter's like the astronaut in the Saturn V rocket. Everyone's looking at him and he's the man. We've got the technicians here. We've got Richard, Andrew and Tracy, who are Houston Mission Control. They do a great job. You didn't even notice Richard flurrying back and forth between those screens earlier to get the rocket off the ground.
Yeah. Now, could I just ask a final thing?
Yeah.
Those bits of paper, would you hand those out?
Thank you.
Okay, so you've got the idea that I work on the basis of continuous improvement. Look, thank you for your interest and your contributions. I look forward to being in touch with you. But what I'd like you to do is evaluate this. And the people are outside. There's a link that you've got, and you've seen this one before. So what I'd like you to do is please complete this blank sheet of paper. It's voluntary, anonymous, and in writing. And by the way, the script at the bottom is the standard script that UniSA requires for this type of evaluation, just so you can see how it works. So thank you very much for your interest and for your questions.
And for those folks online, thanks for joining us today. I hope you have a great day leading to the weekend. And for those of us who are here, we might go back for another croissant and coffee and some fruit. So we'll catch you later.